Inductive method and deductive reasoning go together. Inductive reasoning is not good. What inductive reasoning does is it takes one example and you make a stereotype out of one thing. Okay? For example, you might have you might have one female that completes Navy SEAL school. And then you might use inductive reasoning would say, well, that proves that there's absolutely no difference biologically between males and females. That is not a good conclusion. That's an exceptional case. Okay, so the inductive method would say this. This female passed SEAL school, which shows that this female can pass SEAL school, and that maybe others can. That's the difference between them, okay? So inductive reasoning is this overarching jump to conclusions kind of thing based on one case in point anecdotal piece of evidence. Inductive method reduces that occurrence down to exactly what it is, that occurrence. So for example, in Acts chapter 4 or Acts chapter 2, when we find out that God predestinated or predetermined, is ordinate counsel and knowledge and wisdom, predeterminate counsel, determined that Christ should die at wicked hands, Pontius Pilate and all that. A Calvinist uses inductive reasoning and says, oh, that proves God predestinated all things that come to pass, including all wicked things like the rape of small children. And the inductive method would say, no, that just proves that God predestinated that thing to come to pass. God predetermined that thing to come to pass because that's what we're being told. There's no reason to broaden the scope to include things into that statement that aren't stated. So with the inductive method, we stop with what is stated. We do not presume or assume anything beyond that. Now, what that does is it allows the Bible to speak for itself, and we don't take the Bible any further than we should. And in so doing, we are respecting the Bible and we're respecting God as if he knows what he's talking about. So when God tells us something, we let him tell us. And then we stop right there. We don't take it any further because we're not God. I don't have the authority to take it any further. If God tells me that he, through his predeterminate counsel, determined for Jesus Christ to be crucified, it is disrespectful to God, and it elevates myself above God to presume that that means God also predetermined something else, because that's not what he's trying to tell me. What's he trying to tell me? He's trying to tell me that he predetermined that to come to pass. And the way for me to respect and honor God is to let him have his say and be very precise about it. This is what God said, and these other things are not what God said. So I'm not going to take it further than what Scripture says. And if you're following a paradigm rather than Scripture, which is a fault we probably all have to some degree, you're going to read your paradigm into Scripture at places where you don't realize that you're doing it. And that's a place where Calvinists tend to do it a lot. They use inductive reasoning rather than the inductive method. So observation, interpretation, application. Observation is you're going to observe as many things about the text as you can. And one of the ways to do this is to ask a whole bunch of questions. Who is the author? Who's the audience? When is this happening? What are the situations concerning what significant events have already happened? What significant events have not already happened? How does that influence what is being said here? Does it influence what is being said? How is that different from the situation that I find myself in? How different is that? And these questions are endless. Now, I've told this story many times that when I was taking a class on hermeneutics, the observation portion, the professor said, I want you to go home and I want you to write 50 observation questions on the shortest verse in the English Bible, Jesus wept, right? And I think there was a discussion about this anyway, about what the shortest verse is. In Greek, I think it's rejoice evermore out of 1 Thessalonians 5. And then somebody pointed out another one out of the Old Testament. I can't remember which one it was. It was the shortest with some other respect. But anyway, Jesus wept, 2 words, 50 observation questions. We all go home. We're just like really scouring the earth for questions. We hit about 12 or 15 and we feel like we're done. I have nothing else to ask. But we came up with 50. Eventually came up with 50. Turned those in. Very next homework assignment was to come up with 50 more, different ones for the same verse. Which shows you if you can write 100 observation questions for Jesus wept, how many more observation questions can you write? How inexhaustible is it? Okay. Now there's a practical line you have to draw. You have time and things like that. And the more you do this, the better you get at it. And especially as you do it with a group, the more things you tend to think about. So you're going to ask all kinds of observation questions, and you're going to include your assumptions. Identify assumptions from yourself and from the group in the observation questions and ask all those questions. Now, you may not be able to get all the answer to all those questions, okay? But you can evaluate them. Like this question is very, very important. This question is interesting, but probably doesn't affect the meaning a whole lot, or I don't know. You can weight them like that. Now, the interpretation is the correct answer to all your observation questions. That's the interpretation, and there's only one interpretation. And the interpretation is what the original author is intending to convey to the original audience. Now, a lot of people confuse interpretation with application, and they'll say things like, oh, that's your interpretation. No, that's probably that person's opinion or that person's application. And people get confused. They think that what we're supposed to do with the text today is the interpretation. No, the interpretation is what the original author meant to the original audience, and it stops there. There's only one interpretation, and that's what it is. That's the only thing it is, and it's not anything else. Now, it may apply in 100 different ways. There may be an inexhaustible amount of applications from that one interpretation, but there's still just one interpretation. Now, just because there's one interpretation, that sounds like an arrogant thing for me to say, and I think what you're hearing is that I think I have it. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that there's one interpretation, and I might not be able to get it, and you might not be able to get it. So as we ask all of our observation questions, say we ask 100 observation questions about a passage, and we can only answer 45 of them, and we don't have the resources or the time or whatever to answer the other 55 questions. We can only answer 45 of them. So whatever our interpretation is, we will give it a confidence margin of, say, 45%, because there's a lot of things we don't know, and we've recognized them by not being able to answer a whole bunch of observation questions. All right? So while there is one true meaning, we only think we have a confidence margin that we have arrived at that one meaning of 45%. Therefore, we have a low confidence margin, and we should probably not base a whole bunch of doctrines or make any requirements based on that conclusion that we have. And we should stay open to the possibility of those 55 unanswered questions to be answered later, and you kind of keep them floating around in the back of your head. So there's only one interpretation. Many, many observations. One interpretation doesn't mean that we know what it is, but there's only one. And then there's application, and there could be a lot of applications. Could be a boatload of applications, depending on how you think of it. And some people say there's a historic application, there's a spiritual application. Okay, there's a lot of applications. What you want to do is you want to study. And application is what? It's what you should do. How does the text, after you get an interpretation, how does what you have learned in that process affect how you should behave? That's the application. What can the text do for you to help you transform into a wise person, into a more skillful person, into a more articulate person, into a person who is more perfect, into not sinless, but complete, mature, ready, into a person who has a higher capacity to edify other people? How can the text help you do that? And to edify other people means you are equipped to help other people in their transformation journey. So a correctly applied text should do all of that to and for you, and over time.